The porch light is still on, even though it's past midnight. Somewhere down the block, a car with the windows cracked is idling at a stop sign that doesn't need to be idled at because the song on the radio hasn't ended yet.
You keep saying you got
And nobody wants to be the one who turns the key before it does. A screen door creaks somewhere.
these boots are made for
A
walking.
record needle finds its groove with that soft hiss of static right before the first note lands. This is 1966. Not the version in the history books. The version that lived in kitchens, in cars, in church basements turned into dance floors, in the 3 minutes between when you walked in the door and when your mother called you for supper. If you were alive that year, you don't remember it in dates. You remember it in songs.
These boots are made for walking.
You remember exactly where you were standing the first time a particular voice came out of a transistor radio and made the whole room go quiet.
For me.
Some of you were falling in love for the first time. Some of you were saying goodbye to someone in a uniform.
One of these days, these boots are gonna.
Some of you were just kids sneaking a station your parents didn't approve of, low enough that nobody upstairs could hear. Tonight, we're walking through 1966 one month at a time. 12 songs, 12 moments,
You call love, but confess.
12 pieces of a year that changed soul music forever. Not just the hits everybody already knows by heart, the stories behind them,
Start walking.
the rooms they were recorded in, the people who almost didn't get to sing them at all.
And what he knows, you ain't had time.
Sticking around means you never miss the next one. The year didn't so much begin as it exploded. Whatever record was sitting at the top of the charts when 1965 folded into 1966. It was still James Brown's, and it stayed there stubbornly into the new year like it refused to acknowledge the calendar had changed. By the time this song hit radios in January, it had already lived a strange life. Brown had recorded an earlier version back in 1964, released under a different title. On a different label, tangled up in a contract dispute so messy that the song barely got a chance to breathe. It took a full re-recording, a new arrangement built around that horn stab everybody can hum without even trying, before the world actually heard the version that would define him. What almost nobody talks about is how physically demanding this song was to perform live. Brown didn't just sing it. He attacked it, dropped to his knees for it.
So nice, I got you.
Spun and pointed and commanded a full horn section to hit their marks on a dime.
Wow, I feel good.
Night after night, city after city, on a tour schedule that would have broken most performers in half. His band rehearsed like a military unit because he ran it like one.
I feel
Musicians who played with him during this era described fines for missed notes, for scuffed shoes, for anything less than absolute precision, because Brown understood something most artists of the era didn't yet.
like sugar and spice.
The show had to feel spontaneous while being drilled to perfection underneath.
So nice,
For a lot of families starting their year in January 1966,
so nice, I got you.
this is the song playing when the television was still black and white,
So nice, I got you.
when the living room carpet still smelled new, when a radio DJ's voice was the closest thing to breaking news most households
So
got.
good, I got you.
It didn't ask permission to make you move. It just did. 15 years old, and already staring down the kind of crisis that ends most child stars before they ever become adult ones. Stevie Wonder's voice was changing, and Motown didn't quite know what to do with him anymore. He'd been a novelty a few years earlier, little Stevie Wonder, the blind boy genius on the harmonica. But novelty fades fast in the music business, and by 1965 his hits had dried up. Motown executives reportedly debated whether to drop him altogether. What saved him wasn't a strategy meeting. It was a chord progression he brought in himself. Inspired loosely by a Bob Dylan record he'd been listening to, built around a bass line that refused to sit still. The people in the room that day weren't expecting much from him. Session players at Motown were used to teenage acts coming and going. But something shifted the moment the horns kicked in and Stevie, no longer little, no longer a novelty, just a young man with an instinct nobody had bothered to fully trust yet, leaned into the microphone and owned the room. For families who'd grown up watching this kid on television, hearing him now with a grown man's confidence in his voice felt like watching someone you knew come into themselves in real time. It wasn't just a comeback single. It was proof that Motown's youngest star was about to become one of its most important artists for the next 5 decades. Somebody out there remembers exactly which radio station played this first in their town, and exactly what they were doing when it came on. If that's you, the exact street, the exact kitchen, the exact person standing next to you, put it in the comments. I read every single one, and honestly, they're half the reason this channel exists. A phone number as a song title sounds like a novelty gimmick on paper. In Wilson Pickett's hands, it became something closer to gospel. Pickett recorded this one down at the Stack Studio in Memphis, working alongside guitarist Steve Cropper, who co-wrote it with him in a session that reportedly came together fast. Almost too fast for how permanent the finished record would turn out to be. Stax in this era wasn't a polished operation with separate isolation booths and layered overdubs.
Let me hear y'all say it out there one time.
It was a converted movie theater, sloped floor and all, where the musicians played together in one room and captured whatever happened. What made Pickett different from so many of his peers wasn't subtlety. It was force. He sang like a man trying to be heard over a storm, and the band around him,
I want to thank you for being so good to me. And I want
the Memphis horns, the rhythm section that would go on to define Southern soul for the rest of the decade, matched him note for note rather than backing away from his intensity. For 7 weeks that spring, this record simply refused to leave the top of the R&B charts, an unbroken run that outlasted nearly everything else released that entire year. Teenagers really did call that number or numbers close to it, hoping something magic would happen on the other end. Some radio stations reported callers asking if the number was real. It wasn't, not exactly, but the feeling behind it was. There's a version of this story where Percy Sledge never becomes a singer at all. He was working as an orderly at a hospital in Sheffield, Alabama, singing on the side in local clubs, nowhere near a recording contract, nowhere near a career. The song itself reportedly came together almost by accident, born out of Sledge improvising lyrics about heartbreak while his bandmates worked out a chord progression behind him, the kind of moment that happens in a rehearsal room and either gets forgotten by morning or becomes something nobody in that room will ever be able to explain fully, even decades later. It was recorded at a small studio in Muscle Shoals with a horn section that, by some accounts, wasn't even entirely in tune, and none of that mattered once Sledge opened his mouth. His voice didn't have the polish of a trained vocalist. It had something rarer. The sound of a man who meant every single word, cracking slightly in exactly the places where real heartbreak cracks. This was the record couples slow danced to at their wedding, the record that played at funerals, the record a father might have quietly hummed while sitting alone in a parked car outside a house he no longer lived in. It became the biggest hit of Sledge's entire career and one of the defining ballads of the whole decade. A song that reached #1 not just on the R&B charts, but across the entire Hot 100, something very few Southern soul records managed to do that year. By 1966, the Temptations weren't newcomers anymore. They'd already had massive hits, already established themselves as Motown's sharpest dressed, tightest choreographed vocal group. But this particular record marked something specific. The moment producer Smokey Robinson handed the group a song built almost entirely around rhythm, urgency, a beat that refused to slow down for anybody. David Ruffin took the lead, and what's easy to forget now is how much control a lead singer had to have to write a track moving this fast without losing the emotional thread underneath it. Ruffin wasn't just keeping pace with the tempo. He was pleading through it, using the speed of the song to make the desperation in the lyrics feel even more real. A man trying to convince someone to be ready for a love he can't slow down long enough to properly explain. The choreography built around this song became legendary in its own right. The group's stage routines were rehearsed with the same discipline as a marching band. Every turn and hand gesture landing exactly on the beat, night after night on tour. In towns where a black vocal group performing with this level of polish and precision was itself making a statement, whether the audience fully understood it that way or not. For teenagers that May, learning the steps to this song in a friend's basement or a school gymnasium was practically a rite of passage. It wasn't background music. It was something you were expected to know how to move to. 6 months after opening the year with pure explosive energy,
This is a man's world.
James Brown returned with something almost entirely different, slow, orchestral, aching in a way that surprised even people who thought they understood exactly what he was capable of. The arrangement leaned heavily on strings, unusual for Brown at the time. Built by arranger Sammy Lowe into something that sounded closer to a film score than a typical soul single. Brown reportedly wrote much of it while riding on his tour bus, scribbling lyrics that acknowledged,
And a baby boy.
almost confessionally, how much men owed to the women who raised them, loved them, and quietly held their lives together. A strikingly vulnerable statement from a performer whose public image was built almost entirely on dominance and control. What makes the song complicated? And what makes it worth sitting with rather than just admiring is the tension between its lyrics and its title. It spends most of its runtime insisting the world belongs to men, only to pivot in its final lines toward crediting women for everything men have.
But it would be nothing.
Audiences in 1966 debated that tension even then, in letters to radio stations and conversations after church, in a year when conversations about gender and power were already shifting underneath everyone's feet. Musically, though, there was no debate. The vocal performance is one of the rawest of Brown's career, less shouted, more genuinely cried. And it remains one of the most sampled, most covered, most quietly influential records to come out of that entire summer. Out of these 12 so far, which one belonged to somebody specific in your life? A parent, a sibling, someone you loved, someone you lost touch with? Drop their name, or just tell their story down in the comments. Some of the most beautiful things I've ever read on this channel came from a comment section exactly like this one. The story behind this title has been told so many times it's almost become folklore, but it happens to be true. Songwriters Isaac Hayes and David Porter were working late at the Stax studio, stuck, running out of ideas, when Porter, locked in the bathroom, taking longer than usual, called out that he was coming. Hayes, sitting at the piano, turned the line into a lyric before Porter had even come back to the room. What that origin story leaves out is how much work it took to turn a throwaway joke into one of the most explosive vocal performances of the decade. Sam Moore and Dave Prater didn't just sing the song. They traded it back and forth like two preachers finishing each other's sermons, call and response built into the DNA of the arrangement, each man pushing the other louder, higher, more urgent, until the track feels less like a recording and more like a live event that happened to get captured on tape. Stax's house band, Booker T, and the MGs along with the Memphis Horns gave the record its backbone. Tight, punchy, built for a dance floor rather than a quiet listen. This was the sound of a label finding its exact identity, distinct from Motown's polish, rougher around the edges and prouder of it. By August, the song had carried Sam and Dave's album to the top of the R&B charts, and by that point, Hold On, I'm Coming wasn't just a hit single anymore. It was a phrase people used in everyday conversation. Borrowed straight off the record without anyone thinking twice about where it came from. By late summer, the Supremes were arguably the most famous vocal group in America, full stop, regardless of genre. And the pressure that came with that fame shaped everything about how this record was built. Writers and producers Holland Dozier Holland leaned into something almost gospel in structure, built around a bass line that walks steadily forward no matter what, mirroring the song's actual message: patience, restraint, the discipline of waiting for something worth having instead of chasing it too fast. Diana Ross's lead vocal carries a kind of world weariness that feels older than her actual age at the time, like she'd already lived the advice the lyrics were giving before she ever sang them. There's a quieter story tucked inside this one, too. The sound of a mother's wisdom passed down. Since the lyrics frame themselves as advice given by the singer's own mother about love and patience. For a lot of daughters listening that August, sitting in a bedroom with the radio on while their own mothers called them down for dinner, the song landed differently than it might have for anyone else. It wasn't just a hit. It was something close to a message being relayed. It became one of the group's signature records, endlessly covered and referenced in the decades since. But in the actual moment it arrived, it was simply the sound of that particular summer, playing out of open windows, from front porches, from cars with the top down on streets that felt, for 3 minutes at a time, entirely unhurried. By fall, the Temptations were on their third chart-topping record of the year, an almost unbelievable run that would have exhausted most groups creatively. Instead, they arrived at this one sounding sharper, tighter, and more confident than ever. The song's message was almost old-fashioned even by 1966 standards, a plea for character over appearance, delivered with a kind of moral clarity that could have felt preachy in lesser hands. What kept it from tipping into lecture was the arrangement underneath it, driven by a rhythm section that gave the whole thing a strut, a swagger that undercut any sense of the group scolding their listeners. David Ruffin's lead again carried the emotional weight, though this time the group's harmonies did more of the heavy lifting, weaving in and out around him in a way that felt less like backup singing and more like a full congregation responding to a preacher mid-sermon. It's easy to forget, listening now, how much vocal arrangement work went into making 5 distinct voices sound like a single instrument capable of shifting texture from line to line. For a lot of families that September Kids heading back to school, parents adjusting to a new routine, a whole country quietly shifting through its own changes. This record offered something almost reassuring. A reminder, dressed up in a great beat, that the things worth valuing in a person were never the things you could see first. This song had already lived several lives before Wilson Pickett ever touched it. Written years earlier, recorded by multiple artists, passed around the soul and R&B world like a shared inheritance nobody fully owned. Pickett's version is the one that finally locked it into permanence. What set his recording apart wasn't the lyrics, which are barely lyrics at all. Mostly a list of dance names strung together, punctuated by that unmistakable na-na-na-na-na hook that needed no explanation to catch on. It was the sheer physical energy of the performance. Recorded once again at the Stax studio with the Memphis horns driving the arrangement, Pickett sang it like a man determined to physically exhaust himself before the tape ran out.
Let me hear everybody say it one more time for me.
The song became one of those rare records that transcended demographic lines almost instantly, played at black social clubs and white college fraternity parties alike.
How many of you think you got soul?
Covered by garage bands across the country within months of its release, absorbed so completely into American pop culture that many people who grew up dancing to it in gymnasiums and backyard parties never fully learned it started as a soul record at all. For a generation of teenagers that October, this wasn't a song you listened to quietly. It was a song that got you off the wall whether you knew the actual dance steps or not. And most people, honestly, made them up as they went. If any part of this has pulled you back to a specific room, a specific porch, a specific person you haven't thought about in a while, that's really the whole point of doing this. If it meant something to you, passing it along to somebody who'd feel it too is the best way I know to keep these stories alive a little longer. The Temptations closed out an extraordinary year with a record built on jealousy, paranoia, and the particular ache of watching a relationship slip away in slow motion while being powerless to stop it. David Ruffin's vocal performance here is often cited by musicians and critics alike as one of the most technically demanding of his career. Not because of range, but because of restraint. The song asks him to sound like a man barely holding himself together, and doing that convincingly, night after night, in a controlled studio environment, required a level of emotional access that not every singer is willing to reach for on command. The arrangement itself borrowed something from the harder rock sound emerging elsewhere that year. With a driving guitar riff that gave it an edge sharper than most of the group's earlier, smoother hits. It was a deliberate choice by the production team to push the group's sound forward rather than repeat what had already worked 3 times that year. A risk that could have easily backfired, but instead became one of their most enduring records. There's something fitting about a song this raw, closing out the group's remarkable run through 1966. After a year defined so heavily by their own polish and control, here was a record that let all of that control slip, just for a few minutes, and audiences responded to the honesty of it immediately. The year ended the way it had spent most of its months, with the Supremes at the very top, though this final hit sounded almost nothing like the group's earlier, gentler singles. Where much of Motown's output in this era leaned on warmth, this record opened with a guitar figure that sounded closer to a siren than a melody. Producers Holland Dozier Holland were reportedly pushing themselves to evolve the group's sound before it could feel repetitive, aware that pop audiences moved quickly, What they landed on became one of the most sampled and covered records of the following decades. 4 families closing out 1966. Trees going up, radios on in kitchens filled with the smell of whatever was in the oven. It went out swinging the same way the whole year had come in.